I am Asha Dore with Totally Biased Reviews, and I'm here with Chloe Caldwell to talk about her book, Women.
Hi,
Hello.
so good to see you. It's been so long. You were like literally one of the first people who ever took a class with me.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I think it was like the first or second cohort of your class. So awesome.
Yep.
And I'm so excited about your book coming out. I just want to know what you want to say about your book. Like, what would you like to tell people about it, or the process of re-releasing it, or anything that's changed since you first wrote it? Because I feel like that's one of the coolest
Yeah.
things about being a published writer is being able to revisit your work.
I am Chloe Caldwell, and I'm the author of most recently the book Women, a novella. I've also published 2 essay collections over the past 10 years and 1 memoir. A year from now, just about actually, August 5th of 2025, I have a sort of experimental memoir coming out with Graywolf called Trying. But I'm here today, I believe, to talk about Women, which is sort of has an interesting backstory. It is a book that I wrote when I was 27 about a breakup, and it's very like autofiction style. And it's about, there's not a lot of characters in it. It's about 2 women who are 19 years apart. One who is very secure in her identity, the older one, very secure in her identity and is gay and is in a long-term 10-year relationship. And the other one who does not know her sexual orientation, but assumes, I should say, that she's straight because she has never dated a woman, never strayed from that. And they meet and they fall in love and they have a tumultuous, doomed, torrid, passionate love affair that doesn't end well. And the book really, the majority of the book is going through their breakup, I would say. It's not them together, it's them like breaking their own boundaries and trying to be together and like creating these boundaries of, okay, we're not going to talk, but then breaking it and like having sex and then having like a lot of grief. And it's a really short book. I think it's 120 pages and it's just around like 22,000 words. It's also fragmented, so some pages just have a couple lines or a paragraph. Even for people that don't love to read, I think read it because it's short, and in our culture, it's like people really like short books. But yes, it did come out 10 years ago with a small press called Short Flight Long Drive, which is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it was my second book on a small press. I really loved indie presses. I loved micro presses, which means like it's one person running the press. And seeing as I didn't have a MFA or even a college degree and hadn't studied writing, I just felt so happy to have books come out in general. So I really felt at home with these small presses. And I wouldn't say the book was like super popular when it came out at all. But over the years, for whatever reason, I think because the internet and Instagram was newer at the time, so the way people were posting books was different. And so if a celebrity posted a book, it was actually like an enormous deal because it wasn't something we saw in our culture. So actually, this was before the book came out, I believe. Someone had given a galley, which is an early copy of the book, to the writer Ashley Ford. And then Ashley Ford gave it to Lena Dunham, and then Lena Dunham posted it. And that definitely gave it, for like a small press, it gave it this like excitement and cred, because with a small press, you don't have like a publicity team. You're not like sending out to celebrities. So that was really cool. And from there, the book really took on a life of like being word of mouth. Like people really just passed it to each other. And it became sort of this like underground breakup book. So
Yeah.
a lot of people like lost it in a
Huge.
breakup or gave it to someone they were dating.
Yeah, it's got like a cult following kind of, which is that kind of what accounted for it being picked up by Harper and re-released?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. went out of print, I want to say around 2018 or 17. I don't even know when it went out of print. I really wasn't paying attention. I had moved on. I was, I published 2 other books after that. So I wasn't really clued in to women. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't engaged with it. I would love to find out when it went out of print. I keep, every time I do an interview, I'm like, I got to find that out. And I don't. But it was out of print. And while it was out of print, it was still being included on lists all the time. So like it didn't really feel like it was out of print because like it would be like and like kind of, bigger outlets like the Elle magazine roundup or the sexiest books in Vogue and like the cut and like just it kept like popping up. It was in print in the UK. So it had like multiple covers. And so the UK one was always available. But what was happening was I would get DMs or emails from people who were like, I can't find your book and I really want to give it to the girl I'm dating. And I would respond and say, well, it is in print. If you get it, get the UK one. And they would respond and say, like, I don't want that one. Like, I want the one with the white cover. So I was like, that's interesting. And I get it. Like, I really do. We want certain covers. Like, I'm the same way. So that was just something to note, but I definitely wasn't like, oh, people are clamoring for this. Like, it needs to get back in print. Like, it wasn't anything like that. But I think over the years, it did start to irk me that it wasn't in print. And I began working with an agent. I hadn't had a literary agent for some years. And then I began working with Rebecca Gradinger of United Talent Agency in spring of 2023. And in one of our first calls, I said, I would really like to get women back in print. And what was amazing about working with Rebecca is that this was 2023, but she had actually reached out to me back in 2016 when she read Women. And I turned her down because I was anti-agents. So I was like, no, I'm not working with you. So it took all these years. So timing really matters. So then we start working together and I'm like, Rebecca, I really want to get women back in print. And she's like, so do I. That's why I originally even reached out to you, is that I loved your book, Women. So from there, she had me put together like a media pack. I started to reflect because from there we were going on 10 years from Women's original release date. So I was like, okay, this has been a long time now. Let me like reflect. What did happen with this book? Like, because I could tell it gets more publicity and I get more emails about it than my other books. So I started to reflect and put that all into like one document of like what has happened with this book. And I looked at like all the emails I had gotten and I looked at the different photos of celebrities who had posted it and all of the list it was on. And I kind of put that packet together for my agent. And I think once I made that packet, I was like, this is interesting. Like this has had steady press for 10 years, even though it literally wasn't in print. It was also on the L Word Generation Q in a scene where the characters read out loud from it, but it wasn't in print. So like, it's really weird.
That's wild.
It's been such a weird, strange book in my life. Well, it's really given me so much. Like writing's amazing. I just keep thinking like it's just such the long game. So from there, we're like, obviously, since it was me and I do all my books on indies, we were like, all right, well, let's kind of do it, or at least I was like, let's do it on an indie. And there was an editor at an indie kind of in the vein of like Coffee House, like kind of in that realm, who was interested. So it was kind of a no-brainer, like, oh, let's let them do it. But then my agent was like, what if we actually took it out to the big 5 publishers just to see? And I was like, yeah, I'm curious too. It's just so interesting because I know 10 years ago they never would have published it. Like it was this really short, like this short novella. I didn't have, cred really. Like I guarantee you they would have all said novellas don't sell, or like I guarantee it. So, but this time they were interested because it already had some popularity, and we got 2 or 3 offers. And I know it was really unbelievable. And I went with Harper Perennial because the editor there is amazing. Ezra Kupor was doing actually the 2 or 3 books they did before women were also all queer, and they were like, I want to keep my queer streak going. And
Mhm.
they Harper Perennial had really great ideas for it. They really understood what the book was, and to kind of keep it in the vein of the original. So we did have conversations of like, should we totally change the cover? And eventually they landed on, you know what, let's do the same cover but with a little updates. So I
Mhm.
think that was a good call.
Mhm.
um and they had me write an afterword, which was really, really fun. And we got Katie Heaney, who's a romance and young adult writer, to write the intro. And I was able to add some scenes that I had originally cut. Um, like cut for no reason, really. Just, you know
Mhm.
how it is. Like you're writing, you're like, cut that. And then I looked back at these scenes and I was like, oh my God, why did I cut these? You know, so that was like, I feel very lucky because I don't
Mhm.
think a lot of writers they don't get to do that. So
Mhm.
we put some new scenes in, tweaked a tiny bit of the language, and that was pretty much that. We got some new blurbs, and that was it. But it had a whole different, you know, when I put it out with the small press, again, there's no publicity team, there's nothing.
Mhm.
Um, but isn't it so beautiful and magical that even with like quote nothing books, it found its way. So
Mhm.
this time we put it out with spreadsheets to send it to, and galleys, and you know, events, and all. It's just like a different world. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. It's so interesting and cool because I feel that a lot of the information that we get from like everyone, like agents, indie writers, big five writers, is just like this is what will work, this is what won't work. Once you start an
Mhm.
indie, it's almost impossible to get a deal with a big five publisher, you know, and then like but something like this is so neat because it just like the book just had its own legs without all of that.
Yeah, I think it's good for people to remember that like there is delayed gratification, and the only reason this happened is because I went with a small press. I mean, I could have back then been like, "Oh, I'm only going with big publishers and no one wants it, so I'm going to shelve the book." But I didn't. I was like, I'm going to put it out with this indie press and still write what I want to write. So I think it's a lesson in that. No one ever writes a book so that later it will go to a big publisher. You know, no one writes a book so that it will go out of print and then go to a big publisher. Like that is not, I
Yeah.
didn't even, I know, of course not. Like I didn't think about things like that. So whatever happens with your book happens, and every book is different. I do remember this happening with some of Kate Zambrino's books.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
remember that? And it was also Harper Perennial, because I think that Harper Perennial like does a good reissue. They do a
Mhm.
good backlist. So,
I feel like Harper is the one that I hear doing that kind of stuff more. It's like
uh-huh.
there's some kind of like sparkles around that publishing house that seem to make it more like open
Yeah.
to like art, but you have to prove yourself first with indie presses and it's
Yeah, that is the world that we live in, and there's kind of like no way to get around that.
yeah, I agree, but it's I think it's so cool. I didn't know that it was on the L Word. Did you get like paid for that at all?
Yeah,
I'm
they
just curious.
actually did.
Yeah.
Usually the answer is no for everything, but I think the only reason I did was because they actually did read words out loud from it, so they have to pay you. Like it wasn't, you know how sometimes books are on television, but they're like just on the table, which that
Mhm.
would have been amazing too. But
Mhm.
the showrunner and writer of Generation Q, L Word Generation Q, Marja Lewis Ryan,
Mhm.
someone gave her a book at some point because um she put it in a roundup when she was asked like her favorite books in the cut. She said, "Oh, I give women to everyone that's coming out." And
Mhm.
then I think I just got an email one day from like one of the managers who said that they wanted to use it in the show, and they sent me like the part of the script that the character would be reading from it, and it's a character reading it out loud to her grandmother, and her grandmother is in the hospital, and she reads a couple scenes, and she says like she's trying to scare her grandma back into life because it's like such a like because it's like a more shocking, I don't know, scene that she's reading. So that was cool. They did pay a little bit, and they were really supportive. I messaged with like some of the characters who who were in that scene, and with Marja, and they were all just like really lovely. And the characters in real life too had read the book. It was Jacqueline Chobani and Rosanny Zayas,
Amazing.
who are in those scenes. Yeah, so that was a really full circle kind of experience, and
Yeah.
cool.
I
Yeah.
bet. And what I really love about this is like I know the book does have like a plot, but it's not really a traditional plot structure, right? Like it is fragmented and there's a lot of movement and time with all the different pieces. I think that the at least for me, and I wonder if this is true for you, but it's kind of like a emotional plot. Like
Yes.
it's just like based on like the movement of emotions between the different people.
Yeah.
And I feel like, it's short, it's about a breakup. It doesn't have like a traditional plot with like a climax and
Right.
fall down or whatever. And yet all of these people, like, it really speaks to them. It's really, like, speaks to a truth that I think goes beyond, our traditional, like, romance plot that we see in, like, every other
Mm-hmm.
book, and
Yeah.
I really like that. It makes me positive about writing, I think, because I hope that someday that, what we think is true about writing will sort of align with what is actually true and good and what speaks to people.
That's the hope. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for saying that. It's I when I wrote it, I just wrote it, and I don't know anything about plot, and I had never written a novel, and I didn't read any books about how to write a novel. Like, I truly don't know the formula. And recently I was talking with someone, and I think I was convinced that women had a plot, like a tradition, like accidentally, that it had like, okay, well, act one, they meet, act two, they begin being together, act three, it all breaks down. But like, kind of, but you're right. I think it's way less linear. And it also, so a traditional plot would be more like, what would a traditional plot be for that book? Or
I
like
feel
for
like
that kind of story?
Yeah, like, I feel like you're right, it does, like, line up with time, but there's so much movement back in time, I think, and there's a lot of back and forth that I would like, if I were seeing this as a show, it would be more, like, montagey than it would be like,
Yes.
first we met, then we broke up, it's like the chick falls and the guy helps her get up or whatever, like,
Yeah.
all that.
Right,
So
and then it would also end with them resolving or being
yeah.
together, whereas there's no resolve.
Mhm.
So I love what you're saying, that it's kind of like I mean, I've always definitely felt like I can do emotional plots and not other kind of plots, so that makes sense. And I love that you're saying it's kind of like an anti-plot, because you're right, because why are people relating to it so much? And it's not the formula of like romance books.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that's really interesting. It makes me think of like there's something I've been writing that like hopefully will be a novel, but it's similar, where it doesn't it's an estranged step parent to their stepson, like writing letters to the stepson, but it also doesn't have that like the plot. That's just so
Mhm.
hard. It's just so hard for me.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm hoping the magic of whatever happened with women can happen again. But I think you're right that we need more like either anti-love stories or like non-traditional romance plots.
Yeah, I feel like we spend a lot of time in grief of these kind of lost relationships, and your book reminds me of that grief, which is just to me this haunting. Like even when they're still kind of back and forth, they're like haunted by each other, and
Yeah.
I think that it's nice to read that because we don't really talk about that with our friends. It becomes really boring when we start to go on and on and on about a breakup that's just over.
Yeah. Imagine being friends with me though. I'm like, oh God, I'm totally that friend. But you're right. Like it comes to a point where you're like, I actually can't talk about this to people anymore. And that's where writing comes in. You're like, but I can write about
Right.
it.
Yeah, exactly. No,
That's why I
totally.
write so much. I'm like, I would lose all my friends. Yeah, that's really funny.
Such a wonderful little book. I love it so much, and I'm just, like, so glad that it's coming back out because I did, like it is, like, one of the books that I buy often for presents, and I did notice that I couldn't get it for a while. I'm like, well, I still
I
have like
noticed.
3, so.
Interesting. Yeah.
Um, but I'm gonna totally buy the new one. I'm probably gonna get the UK version because of the picture, and
Yeah, you
I want to see
should.
all the
It's
scenes.
really fun. And I love how like the UK version with the painting is so opposite of the white one. Like it's so electric and like loud, which both of them make sense for the book in these completely different ways. It's really fun. That was the first time, I've done a bunch of books, and that was the first time when they sent me like, hey, what do you think of this cover? Usually like you have notes or you hate it, or like they send you multiple, you go back with notes and then they bring you 3 more versions or whatever.
Mhm.
And I was just like, it's perfect. Like
Yeah.
how did you guys do that? It's
Mhm.
perfect.
That's cool, and the cover is beautiful. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
it's really just been such a life affirming experience for me in the sense that now I really trust what I write. Not the sense that I'll ever like have any kind of popular book again, but the sense that like you have to just write what you feel like writing. Because when I wrote Women, I didn't have any queer community. I wasn't in any writing classes. I didn't have anything. Like I was just like living with my dad, working at his music store. And I remember thinking like this book is so weird and like no one's going to relate to it. It's like and I would just be like, "Oh, it's just like this little book. Like it's nothing." Just really dismissive of it
Mhm.
and felt really isolated about it. And then when it came out, I mean, I wouldn't say I was isolated, but I wouldn't say it had any kind of splash. So then I also felt sort of exposed and kind of, I remember feeling a little depressed when it came out. But then now, 10 years later, it has this community around it and
Mhm.
like people around it who support it. And that's just been really amazing to see like what writing can build
Yeah.
within a decade or whatever it ends up being. It's really incredible.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so cool. And really, it's really like a positive thing. You don't hear very many positive things lately, especially since SPD closed. It's like, oh no. No.
Yes, you're right.
Um,
You're right. Yeah, we always hear it's all about like rejections and XYZ, but I also think a lot of people set themselves up for rejections by not being open to micro and small presses because yes, you're going to be rejected if you only query 3 agents and you only send to 5 publishers. Yes, you will be rejected. But
mhm.
if you send to 300, you won't be. Or if you think outside the box or you publish on a publishing collective or you self like there's so many ways to do things, but the people that keep going the total straight and narrow, it does set you up for like a harder experience, I feel.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems like it. It seems like it for sure.
I launched a few months ago the website called scrappyliterary.com because I was again reflecting on my career and how I've been really scrappy and like used my resources and thought outside the box, and I really want to make that accessible to other people as well and show them that if they aren't going the MFA way or they aren't in a writing class or don't have the funds for something, that there's other ways to think about the publishing industry and how to carve out space for yourself in the literary world. So that's sort of the ethos, is that it's scrappy. And I host retreats. I've actually hosted 20 retreats now,
Whoa.
um, before having this website. So now I have them all in one place on the website of like the history of the retreats. They started in my living room and now they're like not in my living room. And they're at Airbnbs, and I've also done them in Paris and in Iceland.
Mhm.
The next one is actually in October, and it is in Portland, Oregon. Um, so that's on the website right now, and it will have some more details. And also on Scrappy Literary are ways to do one-on-one phone calls with me or with my Scrappy Literary partner, Alex Alberto, who is really a radical person in the way they're thinking about publishing. They have begun a queer publishing collective and publish their essay collection Entwined that way. And it's their first book and it sold 1,200 copies, which is more
Wow.
than my book sold. And they also sold out Books Are Magic in Brooklyn for an event. It's really, Alex is really wonderful. So Alex and I are both on there to do phone calls. I do manuscript reads, and it's just a really fun website. We had a graphic designer, Luca, who lives in Portland, do it. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for being here. I'll let you
Thank
to your
you,
next
Asha.
meeting. Yeah, thank you. It's
Let's not let another 10 years go by. And
no, right.
thank you for doing this with me. I really appreciate you giving me the space to talk.
Things seem to accelerate overnight. We are all over each other with sweet words. We send each other sentences. Maggie Nelson and Rebecca Solnit and Mary Ruffle and Catherine Angel and Susan Minot and Adrienne Rich and Alejandro Zambra and Ivan Coyote. We text or email photos of the sentences. I no longer remember the origin of most of them. They are pasted unreferenced into a document on my computer. What I know, when I met you, a blue rush began. We treat desire as a problem to be solved. We fucked for 6 straight hours that afternoon, which does not seem precisely possible, but that is what the clock said. We killed the time. To read is to cover one's face. To write is to show it. Are there many things in this cool-hearted world so utterly exquisite as the pure love of one woman for another? Finn tells me she sits and stares at her email account as though she is about to win the lottery. She sends me a song called Vegetarian, Lesbian Love Song, that won't work, but I keep the file downloaded onto my computer for months anyway, until I eventually move it into the recycle bin. She knows my hours where I work at the library, and she often times her emails to my schedule. She is a night emailer. I email in the mornings. She has insomnia. I sleep like a baby. When I leave work at 9 p.m., there are emails and texts from her waiting to be read. The bus drops me off in my neighborhood and nothing but 7-Eleven is open. I buy red boxed wine and a Hershey bar and walk home to sit in bed and email with Finn until we fall asleep and wake up to start doing it again.